What a shameful and humiliating day for the so-called world's second strongest army. Once again, the ragtag assembly of defeated impostors posing as Russian soldiers were taught a lesson by Ukraine that even the biggest fools among their ranks must deeply feel. They entered Ukraine with arrogance, armed with empty threats, only to now lie scattered across the battlefield like tattered scarecrows. Before delving deeper into the content, let's review the international community's reaction to Moscow's increasingly dire situation, and how the world views the Kremlin's irredeemable decline. Russia boasts of being the world's second strongest army? Perhaps they should rebrand as the world's fastest runners. Putin truly is a genius strategist. No one else could disintegrate the Russian military this quickly except him. Maybe the Russian military should switch to a run and survive model, as that seems to be the only tactic they excel at. The Kremlin calls this a tactical retreat, but it looks more like a panicked marathon to me. When will Putin realize that he is not an emperor but just a delusional old man pushing his country towards oblivion? The mighty Russian army? Turns out they're just a bunch of weaponized criminals, and not even their weapons can save them. Perhaps the Russian military should request state-issued sneakers, as they seem to use them more than their guns. Putin thinks he's a czar? Well, he's just like the last one about to be overthrown by his own people. Russia is fighting for its country's future? Right, their future is one of isolation, boycotts, and decline. If war were a video game, then the Russian forces are definitely playing on easy mode and still losing. These comments reflect global sentiment. Here are the details, please listen carefully. In Kotlin, Ukraine's counterattack sent these cowards fleeing like rats out of a sinking ship. Russia's useless commanders thought they could hold their ground, but as Ukrainian tanks crushed their defenses, they dropped their weapons and ran like cowards, leaving behind the bodies of their comrades scattered everywhere. This is the deserved fate for an army known only for looting, raping, and killing innocent civilians. It's laughable to think that at one time, the Kremlin boasted that their army could take Kyiv in 3 days. Now, not only can they not advance, but they are also fleeing from the areas they had once invaded. The few miserable remnants on the battlefield have two choices: either surrender in disgrace or die like abandoned stray dogs. Watch how the Ukrainian military turns these invaders into a laughingstock. As the counteroffensive began, these pitiful ones could not maintain formation, could not fight, only lay flat on the ground begging for their lives in despair. Perhaps from now on, the Kremlin should consider renaming their special military operation to Great Escape Operation, because that's all the Russian soldiers can manage. It's no surprise that Russian commanders continue to fabricate outrageous stories to deceive their domestic audience. They call this debacle a tactical retreat, as if people can't see the vehicles desperately fleeing eastward, abandoning all they had looted. Only the willfully blind would believe such blatant lies, while in reality, with each passing day, the occupied Russian territories shrink further, and every inch of land is reclaimed by brave Ukrainian soldiers. Sad for Russia, what they lose in Kotlin is not just land, but also honor if they ever had any. Now, the invaders have nowhere to run, no future, no faith. They are not warriors, they are a cursed band of failures, forever marked in history as the most cowardly ever to bear arms. Perhaps now, Putin and his cohort of foolish generals should consider a new plan. Organize a world championship for fleeing, as clearly his soldiers have excelled in this discipline. Every battle is an opportunity for Russia to set a new record for the speed of their retreat. When the war ends, if anyone survives to return to Russia, they can only hang their heads in shame before the world's scorn, for they have turned their country into a joke. In a bold campaign, Ukrainian drones struck a major Russian military arsenal deep within their territory. Sometimes, a conflict swiftly reaches a turning point, forcing both sides to act unlike before, and the current balance cannot be maintained. Ukraine's recent campaigns feel just like that. Surprisingly, deep within Russian territory at the critical center of Tver, from one explosion to the next, over 20 explosions erupted. The targets were not ordinary, the missile arsenals of the Russian military and oil facilities, the lifeblood of the Kremlin. So, how did this strong blow travel to the Russian heartland? Ukraine risked not just their frontline defenses but also stated that we are here right at the heart of Moscow. And how much has this attack disrupted Russia's missile reserves and oil exports? The Ukrainian military might have conducted the largest airstrike on Russian territory in recent days. Their statement was verified to what extent while Ukraine was conducting military operations in the province of Kursk of the Russian Federation. They also increased success by launching a number of surprise attacks on various Russian settlements. This time, the target of the attack was Tver. The most important centers in the region were aimed at. The large explosion deep within Russian territory in the Tver region even took Russian President Putin by surprise from the Ukrainian airstrikes at Tver. In fact, this campaign was not just a random success of a few drones in a clear strategy. The armed forces of Ukraine are simultaneously hitting both the production capacity and use of missiles and the energy revenue of Russia. Perhaps even President Putin did not expect this linked attack. The reason it is called a linked attack is because Ukraine targeted both the missile reserve and the oil facility of Russia in Tver at the same time. As a result, most of the important ammunition of the Russian military burned up. The oil pumping stations of the Kremlin power also caught fire, and the pipeline operators were forced to close the valve. We will see Ukraine announce more details about this astonishing attack, and how the situation of missiles and oil in Russia has become more complicated. New data on Russia's weakening missile reserve, the strategic impetus of Ukraine's deep strike strategy, the damage to Russia's oil infrastructure, and its consequences on the global energy market, and how Russia is in the process of coping, as well as how this attack by Ukraine may weaken domestic perceptions in Russia, and the internal legitimacy of President Putin's government. Ukrainian drones hit Russia's arsenal hard. The armed forces of the Moon Ukraine launched an attack on Russia's most strategic missile arsenals in the Tver region. The weapons depots were destroyed by 20 explosions. The main target of the drones of the Special Forces of Ukraine was the missile arsenal number 23 of the Russian Ministry of Defense in this area. Ukrainian drones hit the main arsenal and 3 buildings of the military unit. After this critical attack, perhaps all the missiles in the arsenal exploded. There seems to be no other explanation for the 20 explosions at the arsenal in the region. After these attacks in Tver, tension shifted to Russia's missile reserve. The Ukrainian side shared important assessments on the matter. Mr. Kirill Budanov, head of Ukraine's military intelligence agency, predicts that Russian forces will soon begin using caliber cruise missiles in attacks against Ukraine again. Mr. Kirill Budanov stated that Russia would be forced to do so because the Kh-101 missile reserve is depleting, the type of missile that Russia has used in recent large-scale coordinated attacks. Russian forces have widely used caliber missiles launched from the Black Sea, in a series of large-scale attacks aimed at civilian infrastructure in the winter of 2022-2023 and early spring of 2023. These coordinated attacks also included various types of missiles and switchblade drones. These attacks aimed to paralyze Ukraine's energy system and force the country to impose a nationwide blackout. Recently, Russian forces have launched a new attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. These attacks mainly involve the use of Kh-101, Kh-55, Kh-59 cruise missiles, as well as ballistic missiles and switchblade drones. We do not know exactly how many missiles the Russian military has. The fact that they have not attacked the energy sector for over a year has allowed Russian forces to accumulate a certain amount of weaponry. When asked, Russia produces how many missiles per month, Mr. Kirill Budanov said the number does not reach 100. But that is a significant number. Experts also estimate the cost of a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile at $13 million US, and the Caliber cruise missile at half that price, that is $6.5 million. Caliber has versions launched from ships, submarines, and aircraft. It is unclear whether such missiles were in the missile arsenal targeted in recent Ukrainian attacks in Tver. However, the Russians have lost a significant missile reserve in a recent attack in Tver. Remarkably, in addition to Russia's missile reserve, energy sources are also on the target list in Ukraine's attack. Attacking Russia's oil facility outside the weapons depot in Tver, the Ukrainian special forces also attacked the Druzhba oil pumping station with drones. This oil facility is an important component of the pipeline system. Initially, the results of the attack on the pumping base station were damaged, along with the additive tanks leaking petroleum products and fire. The Russians even had to stop the main pipeline supplying oil to the Novozhivkov house in the Bryansk region. This is truly a scandal for the Kremlin. The Kremlin primarily uses Russia's oil resources to operate the war machine. Financial resources from oil revenue account for more than 14% of Russia's total revenue. That's why the drone attack on Druzhba is tragic for the Kremlin. Not only in the attack in Tver, the Ukrainian forces also seem determined to make Russia's oil facilities their main target. By the end of March, Ukraine had destroyed about 14% of Russia's refining capacity, and forced the Russian government to impose a 6-month ban on gasoline exports. One of the world's largest oil producers is now importing gasoline. But according to analysts close to the Kremlin, destruction is too strong a word for Russia's oil facilities. Damage is more appropriate. Russian sources claim that some damaged units were back in operation within less than a week, others within 2 to 3 weeks. The main wave of Ukrainian attacks took place before the gasoline export ban in Russia. The government was too cautious to not allow a repeat of last summer's fuel crisis. Oil imports for Russia have taken place in the past and are still available at the present time on a very small scale. Russia is a very large country, and importing to some regions is easier than local delivery. For example, the US is a major LNG exporter, but LNG stations in the northeastern US often accept LNG shipments from outside the US. No modern LNG carrier is due to construction, and the Jones Act requires the transport of any goods between US ports on ships built, owned, flagged, and crewed by Americans. This makes it nearly impossible to deliver LNG from the Gulf to Ever, Massachusetts. On the other hand, Russia is a major exporter of diesel oil. If Russia is forced to export crude oil instead of refined products, the price of oil will decrease rather than increase. However, the supply of diesel oil will decrease, and the price of diesel oil may also increase. This could harm global consumers, and fuel prices are really important. Global refining capacity cannot keep up with demand, so stopping a significant part of it could increase global fuel prices. In Russia, it can be seen that prices are really starting to rise. It can be seen that attacks on this type of target along with sanctions and price ceilings for Russian oil are achieving goals that were largely unattainable before. Attacks on oil facilities are reducing Russia's financial and logistical capacity to wage war. The Russian government is largely indifferent to whether oil companies sell their output as crude oil or refined products. They impose a very heavy tax on crude oil at the well, using a formula linked to the global price, and then tax the company's profits. Of course, company profits increase when oil companies export products instead of crude oil, but the impact on the state budget is quite small. Moreover, refining in Russia is subsidized with the current oil price. Russian oil companies earn $10 per barrel they pass through their refineries. Reducing refining activity means the subsidy paid will be smaller. On the other hand, companies earn up to $15 compared to the normal export value of oil when they export a range of refined products. Assuming that Russia has lost 700,000 barrels of oil per day in the past 2 months, this is equivalent to a loss of $315 million per month. This is a significant number, but it is small compared to Russia's total oil and gas revenue. Ukrainian attacks have dealt a significant blow to Russia's refining capacity, stopping production of up to 900,000 barrels per day. We also need to include this number in the calculation, which may have a capacity reduction at the same location until mid-April. Most observers estimate this number at 600,000 barrels. Russia is struggling to remedy this situation, but repairs will be slow and costly. This is partly because the refining columns, where oil is separated into components, are very large and complex devices. It takes many years to design and manufacture, and partly because Western sanctions prevent Russian companies from accessing specialized components. Of course, there are also factors where Russia has an advantage. For example, refining columns or atmospheric or primary distillation units are really huge devices, but they are quite simple and can be patched up within weeks with Russian equipment and materials. Secondary coking cracking units depend on Western equipment. Once Russia repairs its oil facilities, they may switch to stronger exports. But Russia can only sell their oil to a few countries like China, India, and Turkey. Their facilities are equipped to use certain types of oil produced in Russia. Therefore, these countries have a lower purchasing power for Russian oil than the market value. The reason Russia mainly sells to these countries is because they are willing to help Russia get past the price cap. This gives them a certain market power against Russia, so there is a discount for Russian crude oil. But this discount has decreased in recent months. There isn't much floating oil on the market. So Russia doesn't have many alternative options to sell, and these countries also don't have many alternative options to buy, since from December 2022, European refineries have taken oil from traditional suppliers for India and China instead of Russian oil they had previously bought. As Russia begins to sell more crude oil, when they start selling fewer products, the demand for products outside Russian refineries also increases, and the demand for crude oil increases in sync with Russia's additional crude oil on the market. But currently Russia does not sell to a few countries, because their crude oil is a specialty item. Uranium is a fairly standard mixture, not much different from the average heavy acid content of the Gulf 34. It is a popular type in the past decade due to its high diesel yield and started selling higher than Brent before. It is sold with a few dollars per barrel discount, reflecting the presence of sulfur in the crude oil. But as more and more refineries around the world install desulfurization equipment, this is no longer a discount factor. Expo exported from the Russian Far East is a premium mixture, considered by refineries as a good component to mix into the input oil stream to increase yield and throughput. Both types can easily be processed in dozens of refineries. Russia may want to use these issues to its advantage when it comes to oil and other energy sources. But considering Russia's energy situation with Belarus, the Kremlin regime is unlikely to provide those resources. As leverage for Europe, it should be remembered that in the first half of March, Russia imported 3,000 tons of fuel oil from Belarus. This number was 0 in January. The Kremlin had to ask Kazakhstan to reserve 100,000 tons of gasoline to supply in case a shortage might occur. Russia produces about 800,000 tons of gasoline per week. 3,000 tons in 2 weeks is less than 0.2%. This seems to be a rounding number. Russia has requested Kazakhstan to reserve an emergency amount of gasoline, but that has nothing to do with the tax on refineries. There was a major flood in the area bordering Kazakhstan, and there was a risk that a refinery in that area would have to close due to high fuel demand for evacuation. In the end, this was unnecessary, But in the last week of April 2024, retail diesel prices increased by 10% according to some reports. The Russian government may also consider lifting restrictions on the use of low-quality gasoline to prevent fuel shortages. This risks damaging engines, further straining the already poor maintenance capacity of military vehicles and nullifying the warranty for foreign-made vehicles. Low-quality gasoline does not damage engines. It is a more polluting type of fuel, that's why it's banned, but it doesn't damage engines. Russian military equipment mainly runs on diesel, which is abundant, and the engines in these vehicles are designed for much lower quality fuels before the heroic standards took effect. In fact, higher sulfur content fuel benefits sulfur engines, acting as a lubricant. Nullifying the warranty for foreign-made vehicles is perhaps the least concern for Russian drivers, since those warranties haven't really been effective since foreign manufacturers left Russia. On the other hand, inconsistent enforcement and monitoring have weakened the effectiveness of the price cap. Federal revenue in Russia reached a record $320 billion in 2023. The price cap may also have been set too high. A recent assessment by the Center for Clean Air and Energy Research, a Finnish consulting organization, showed that a lower price could reduce Russia's oil export revenue by up to 25% from December 2022 to March 2024 without forcing Russian companies to close the valve. But whether the price cap was really effective in the first few months of 2023 seems to be effective, as the combination of low oil prices, high freight rates, and deep discounts for Russian crude oil pushed its effective price below the price cap. In recent months, as the size of the ghost fleet has increased, oil prices have soared, and the skills of border crossers have improved, leading to lower freight rates. Since February, oil has traded at over $70 a barrel. Prices recently fell along with the rest of the oil market. In fact, if the price cap was set lower and could be enforceable, Russia's export revenue would be lower, but this is considered an uncertainty. If the price is $60 per barrel, nothing enforceable makes the lower price cap effective, or this is a rational decision to wait for the impact of Western sanctions and Ukraine's aggression, which are the main factors reducing the value of Russian oil. On the other hand, of course, there is also a reality that Russia is making significant preparations to counter Ukraine on this issue. Last winter, the Kremlin attacked elements of Ukraine's power infrastructure, but was unsuccessful. After that, the attacks stopped. At that time, the attacks targeted transformers that were relatively easy to hit with relatively simple drones. This time, the Chomin power did not threaten but systematically attacked Ukraine's power generation capacity, targeting power plant turbines and control equipment to launch large-scale coordinated attacks, effectively targeting both Ukraine's thermal and hydroelectric plants. Ukraine's largest hydroelectric plant had to face catastrophic impacts on their generator units. Despite attacks on refineries, President Putin's escalation seems to still be possible. However, attacks on power infrastructure occurred after attacks on refineries. These attacks caused significant damage, and repairing power plants would be costly. Russia also began attacking Ukraine's gas infrastructure, starting with the pumping site of the largest underground gas storage facility in Ukraine, where Russia invited European gas traders. This is the first time Russia has avoided attacks on gas infrastructure, possibly in exchange for unobstructed gas transit to Europe. Attacks on the Russian refinery sector are causing damage to the Kremlin, but so far it has mainly been nuisance fires. It creates a good psychological effect for Ukrainians and a negative impact on Russians. Attacks by Ukraine impose certain monetary costs on Russian oil companies. They also lead to escalated Russian attacks on Ukraine's power infrastructure in retaliation. However, the period is proceeding with all these risks in mind, and does not hesitate to put Russia's most strategic energy facilities on the target list. In summary, the armed forces of Ukraine not only attacked the missile and military arsenal of Russia, but also aimed to destroy one of the most important economic resources of the common power, the oil facilities. The combined damage to the missile arsenal and oil facilities is seriously hindering Russia's war efforts. This is the main strategy for Ukraine to survive a war that has faced a much more concentrated military force, destroying the most important military and oil centers. What do you think about this story? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Now, let's move on to the next part. The battlefield in Ukraine suddenly became fierce and intense before the new year, as this moment is crucial in shaping the outcome of nearly 3 years of war. President Putin is mobilizing all forces from both Russia and North Korea to take control of the entire Donbas region this winter, and he will surely not return it in subsequent negotiations. Meanwhile, he is pushing all Ukrainian forces out of the territory. However, Commander Syrskyi has taken to the front lines, and is determined to use unconventional warfare to inflict maximum damage on the Russian forces. Currently, the most intense battlefield is Pokrovsk, as it is the main logistics center for the entire Donbas region of Ukraine. The Russian forces are now only about 3 to 4 kilometers south of the city. If it falls, The defensive line there will be severely damaged, if not completely collapsed. Russia intends to take over all of Donbass this winter, and Mr. Putin is unlikely to give it back in the peace negotiations expected in 2025. Ukrainian commander Alexander Siersky has described the battles at Pokrovsk as extremely fierce. The invading Russian forces are deploying their full strength to try to breach our defenses. He admits that Ukraine is struggling under the heavy pressure from Russian forces, especially in terms of manpower. General S emphasizes the need for unconventional decisions to enhance defense capabilities and respond more effectively to enemy pressure. Commander Siersky's defense strategy proved very effective in September, when Russian forces could not advance a meter towards Pokrovsk for 6 consecutive days. So this time, how will General Siersky hold Pokrovsk? Firstly, by building fortifications. Ukraine has constructed solid defenses in the south of Pokrovsk. These include trenches, bunkers, and anti-tank ditches to block Russian mechanized vehicles. Under the immense pressure of the superior Russian numbers and firepower, these defense works are facing serious challenges. Secondly, by adjusting defensive tactics, Ukraine has deployed focused defensive tactics, including using territorial defense forces and elite brigades like the 25th Airborne Brigade, using armored vehicles provided by Germany to try to block the Russian attack, although some reports suggest that these units have faced difficulties and a lack of resources. Thirdly, by utilizing artillery and UAVs. Artillery and drones play a crucial role in Ukraine's defense strategy. Artillery is used to counter Russian attacks, while UAVs are deployed to monitor and destroy targets flexibly. Fourthly, by allocating forces and strategic responses. Ukrainian defense forces in Pokrovsk are facing a shortage of manpower and equipment, leading to thinner defenses in some areas. This has allowed Russia to focus its attacks on these weaknesses, particularly from the south, instead of striking directly from the east. This is why Commander Alexander Siersky emphasizes the need for unconventional decisions to cope with the situation. This may include adjusting defensive strategies, reinforcing troops, or even an organized retreat to conserve forces. Fifthly, by protecting supply and logistics lines. We all know Pokrovsk is a critical logistics center, and protecting supply routes and railways is an essential part of the defense strategy. Pokrovsk, the heart of Donbass, will be the final battle. According to the Kiev Independent on December 15, the Russian military is advancing on Pokrovsk from the east and south. After capturing the village of Shevchenko in the south of the city, as mentioned, Russian forces are now less than 4 kilometers away from this vital logistics center at the western edge of Donetsk province. Meanwhile, Pokrovsk is the last stronghold in the southwest of this province, also blocking the Russian military from advancing further into Dnipropetrovsk province and its capital Dnipro, which has a population of 1 million and serves as a logistics center for the Kursk campaigns in the southern region. Stanislav Bunyatov, commander of a platoon in the Independent Assault Battalion No. 24 IDA, wrote on Telegram that everyone had accepted that the Russians would enter Pokrovsk. However, he stressed that not everyone realizes the consequences for Dnipropetrovsk province and Russia's expansion in the region. Dnipropetrovsk does not have many villages like Donetsk, so the Russians will advance faster there. Stanislav Bunyatov said he warned that if Russia advances into the next province of Ukraine, they will again impose conditions to fully control these territories. Currently, about 11,000 people remain in Pokrovsk, which had over 60,000 residents before the full-scale war broke out. Most local service companies and businesses have ceased operations, and the city's gas supply and heating systems have been cut off due to continuous damage to power lines from Russian shelling. Gunshots and explosions have been heard throughout the city. Some mines near Pokrovsk are still operating, and local authorities have been calling for evacuation for several months, emphasizing that there is no safe place in Donetsk province. However, evacuation has been difficult due to the risk of attack. Since September, the National Railway Company has cancelled evacuation trains from Pokrovsk due to fears of Russian attacks, and instead organized trains from Avdiivka in Dnipropetrovsk province, 100 kilometers from Pokrovsk. Evacuation by bus or car is still feasible from Pokrovsk as residents are still hesitant to leave their homes. Russian forces captured the villages of Kalinovo and Selidovo in December. The village of Selidovo is just over 4 kilometers away from Pokrovsk. Mr. Nazar Voloshin, spokesperson for the Khortytsia combat group, said that the Ukrainian military is trying to regain positions lost near Pokrovsk, especially near the village of Selidovo. The enemy attacked our fortifications in the direction of Pokrovsk after prolonged battles. 2 positions were destroyed, and 1 position was lost, Mr. Nazar Voloshin said on national television. Meanwhile, Mr. Gustav Grell, a senior expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations, believes that Russia is planning to attack Pokrovsk from the south to surround and cut off important supply routes to the front lines. Gustav Grell warned that Pokrovsk might suffer the same fate as Kurokova, a city captured by Russia in February 2024. Currently, the Russian military can attack with mortars and artillery. especially since the city is close to the E50 road and the railway line to Dnipropetrovsk, making logistics a vulnerable target. Since capturing Kurokova, Russia's tactics have changed significantly. They spare no ammunition to bomb Ukrainian cities with guided bombs and drones. Drones help the Russian military better observe the terrain, detect the opponent's position, and control important supply lines. Gustav Grell believes that drones are a decisive factor in the Battle of Pokrovsk, with their anti-jamming capabilities and increasing flight range. Unfortunately, the Russians have learned and adapted very quickly in this area, he added. Another important reason for the rapid Russian advance is their numerical advantage. Although the Ukrainian government has made efforts to improve conscription laws and recruit effectively at hotspots of conflict, there are still limitations. Meanwhile, Russia continues to attack intensively. Mr. Federico Borsari, an expert at the European Policy Analysis Center (SEPA), said that Ukraine does not have enough manpower to rotate forces on the battlefield. Russian forces take advantage of this to continuously attack, depleting Ukraine's combat strength and exhausting its resources. Despite large losses, Russia remains determined to capture Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, some Ukrainian units have spoken out against their commanders and assigned tasks beyond their capabilities. However, Mr. Federico Borsari believes that Ukraine still has a slim chance to defend Pokrovsk, and Mr. Gustav Grell thinks that Ukraine is unlikely to keep the city. But it would be a surprise if Russia captures Pokrovsk before the end of this year. At this time, the only task of the Ukrainian military is to try to hold out and keep the defensive line. Dear readers, as mentioned, President Putin wants to accomplish two things before negotiations. One is to capture Donbass, and the other is to reclaim Kursk. North Korean forces, launching a major counteroffensive on Kursk, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. North Korean infantry have begun large-scale attacks along a 650 square kilometer salient that Ukrainian forces created in Russian Kursk in August. Preliminary data today indicates that the Russians have begun using North Korean soldiers in significant numbers in these attacks. Mr. Zelensky wrote on social media, "The Russians have integrated them into mixed units and are using them in operations in Kursk." Mr. Zelensky added, "So far, only there." Indeed, footage released on December 15 shows that North Korean infantry were largely or entirely involved in this attack. They moved in lines across open fields without clear support from vehicles, artillery, or aircraft. As a result, almost all were destroyed by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian Su-27 drops American glide bombs to destroy a pontoon bridge in Kursk. A recent rare video shows a scene of a Ukrainian Air Force Sukhoi Su-27 dropping American-made glide bombs on a Russian pontoon bridge in the Kursk region of western Russia. The video appears to confirm that Ukraine is dropping GPS-guided winged JBU-39 bombs, weighing 113 kilograms each in batches of 4, dropped from a high angle to increase the flight range. In the video, a twin-engine Su-27, one of about 40 remaining supersonic aircraft in Ukraine, flies from a low altitude over a green area, dropping 4 JBU-39 bombs from a single rack under the left wing. Immediately after the bombs are dropped, the pilot quickly banks and changes direction to quickly create distance from Russian air defense systems in the area. The low-flying, climb, bomb dropping, and quick retreat method is a flying technique that minimizes the chance of the aircraft being shot down without significantly reducing the bomb's flight range. If dropped from a higher altitude, a JBU-39 bomb can fly further than 96 kilometers thanks to automatically unfolding wings. However, flying high within the enemy's radar observation range is very dangerous, unless it is a stealth aircraft, and the Su-27 is not capable of stealth. Therefore, Ukrainian Su-27s and similarly equipped MiG-29s often fly at low altitudes to avoid radar, then climb just before dropping bombs. When dropped in this way, the JBU-39 bomb can still fly about 64 kilometers. This tactic clearly allows Ukrainian pilots to avoid danger before dropping glide bombs. While Russia has destroyed a significant number of Ukrainian fighter aircraft on the ground this year, including some Su-27s, aerial shootdowns are rarer. The Su-27 in the video is believed to be targeting one of the pontoon bridges built by Russian engineers across the Shame River in Kursk in August as Russia sought to prevent Ukrainian forces from advancing into the area. These attacks have caused difficulties but ultimately could not prevent Russia from reinforcing its southern defenses along the Shame River. Currently, the conflict in Kursk is taking place many miles east of this river. It is still unclear where Ukraine is focusing its glide bomb attacks as the Russia-Ukraine war enters its 34th month. Russia's glide bomb campaign is much larger than Ukraine's, because Russia has more aircraft and bombs, capable of dropping about 100 bombs per day. Meanwhile, Ukraine can only use about 10 to 12 glide bombs per day. Therefore, Ukraine usually prioritizes attacking high-value targets such as bridges, command posts, and well-defended Russian troop groups instead of randomly bombing trenches and frontline cities as Russia is doing. Ukrainian intelligence reveals North Korean soldiers firing on Russian comrades. North Korean forces fighting alongside the Russian military in Kursk accidentally fired on a Russian unit in a friendly fire incident that killed 8 Russian soldiers, according to a statement from Ukrainian military intelligence on December 24. Officially on the Telegram channel, while fighting in Kursk, a group of North Korean militiamen fired on members of a Russian combat unit. The incident is said to have caused the death of 8 Russian soldiers. The cause of the incident was due to language barriers between Russian and North Korean soldiers, which remains a difficult obstacle to overcome on the battlefield. As of December 14, it is estimated that about 200 soldiers from Russian and North Korean forces have died in combat. In the fall of 2024, Ukrainian and Western officials warned that more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers had gathered in Kursk to support Russia in pushing back Ukrainian forces from the area. Russian military has established special procedures in areas with North Korean soldiers. Russian soldiers must undergo strict checks before entering this area and have their phones and electronic devices confiscated. Russia considers deploying North Korean soldiers to invade Ukraine, facing increasing personnel losses. Russia is considering deploying North Korean soldiers to the eastern Ukrainian front. The spokesman for the combat command announced on national television on December 15, 2024. According to a report by ABC, North Korean soldiers are currently participating in mixed units with Russian forces in the Kursk area, although there is no authenticated evidence of their presence on the eastern Ukrainian front. Mr. Gustav Grell reports that this possibility is entirely feasible, does not rule out the possibility that due to heavy losses in eastern Russia, North Korean soldiers will soon be deployed to the front lines to fight alongside Russian forces. Mr. Gustav Grell emphasizes that Ukrainian forces are ready to counter any North Korean soldiers, just as they are fighting against Russian forces. He asserts, if they appear on the battlefield, they will share the fate of the Russian soldiers who are destroyed. The tense military situation leads to the deployment of North Korean soldiers to various fronts, reflecting Russia's increasing dependence on Mr. Kim Jong-un's forces to compensate for heavy losses as the war continues. Ukraine escalates, destroys Russian fuel train. Ukrainian ground forces have destroyed a Russian train carrying 40 fuel cars in the occupied territory. The attack destroyed $4 million worth of fuel and disrupted an important Russian logistics line. According to information from ABC Ukraine on December 24, the strategy was implemented with the coordination of the Ukrainian Security Agency, Strategic Combat Group, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Agency, Special Forces, and Unmanned Aerial System Forces. In the early stages of the campaign, the military counterintelligence special forces carried out sabotage on the railway tracks as the train was moving, forcing the train to stop. Immediately after, fighters from the 14th Unmanned Aerial System Regiment used drones to attack, setting several fuel cars on fire. The unmanned aerial reconnaissance units of the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Agency then adjusted artillery rounds from the combat group's rocket artillery system, hitting the locomotive and the cars at both ends of the train, making it impossible to move the train and rescue the remaining cars. Eventually, Ukrainian soldiers used attack drones to completely destroy the remaining cars. The successful campaign destroyed the locomotive and all 40 fuel cars. Moreover, the attack also disabled the only railway line providing logistics for the Russian military in the area. This is not the first time the Ukrainian military has attacked Russian railway logistics lines in late June and early August. The UAV unit of the 65th Independent Mechanized Brigade attempted to attack train engines with long-range FPV drones twice but was unsuccessful. However, in September, the Ukrainian military successfully hit a train carrying oil, destroying 3 fuel cars. The December 24 attack marked a significant step in cutting off the Russian supply chain, causing serious damage and weakening the supply capability for Russian occupying forces in Japan. 2 Russian oil tankers sink in the Kerch Strait. 2 Russian oil tankers were severely damaged and sank in the Kerch Strait due to harsh weather conditions. According to Russian media reports on December 15, 2024, the Russian Emergency Ministry also confirmed that the 2 vessels involved were VCF-212 and VCF-239. Each carrying about 4,000 tons of fuel oil. The VCF-212 had 13 sailors, while the VCF-239 had 14 sailors. Both crews sent out distress signals. In response, the Russian Emergency Ministry deployed an Mi-8 helicopter for rescue. 13 sailors from the VGF-212 were evacuated, but unfortunately, 1 person died. According to witnesses quoted, the VGF-212 was split in half by the waves, and the VCF-239 also sank just minutes after a large hole on the ship was widened by the waves, breaking the welds connecting the bow and stern of the ship, causing the ship to split in 2. Ma reported that both ships were built about 50 years ago, and were hastily converted in 1990 from seagoing oil tankers to river sea vessels. The conversion process included cutting the ship in half, removing the middle part, and welding the bow and stern back together, creating a large weld that could not withstand the pressure of strong waves, and this weld broke, causing both ships to sink. Investigators have opened 2 criminal cases related to this sinking incident, although there has not been official confirmation from the authorities yet. The Crimean Peninsula, currently occupied by Russia, is the base for the Black Sea Fleet. However, successful Ukrainian attacks in Crimea have forced Moscow to relocate most of its naval forces from the peninsula to the Russian port city of Novorossiysk since the full-scale war began. Ukraine has repeatedly attacked Russian ships, according to the Ukrainian military. About 30% of Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been destroyed or disabled. Russia operates 71 detention facilities in Ukraine, including 2 torture prisons for prisoners. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office reports that Russia is operating at least 71 facilities for detaining Ukrainians, including locations in temporarily occupied territories and on Russian territory. This information was announced by the German Human Rights Center on December 13, 2024. Among these facilities are 2 locations specifically used for torturing Ukrainian prisoners: a detention center in Kramatorsk and prison camp number 10 in the Movia Republic. Ms. Gressel, head of the German Human Rights Center, spoke at a conference in Malta, stating that Russia denies the existence of these facilities. Russian lawyers and the International Red Cross Committee (ICC) are not allowed access to these detention sites. So far, Russia has not initiated any investigations into the torture of civilian or war prisoners in Ukraine. Human rights activists and Ukrainian officials have repeatedly spoken out about the systematic abuse and torture of Ukrainian prisoners in Russian custody. The denial of access by international organizations raises concerns about serious human rights violations in the Russian prison system. Ms. Gressel emphasized that Russia's lack of transparency and accountability violates international humanitarian law, making Ukrainian prisoners vulnerable to inhumane and brutal acts. Ukrainian police estimate that over 50,000 people have gone missing since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian Human Rights Commissioner Mr. Andriy Yermak stated that there is still no accurate data on the number of Ukrainian soldiers detained by Russia. He also criticized the International Red Cross Committee for being ineffective in verifying the status of war prisoners. This situation reflects a grim picture of Russia's human rights violations in the war, and the urgent need for action from the international community to protect the rights of Ukrainian prisoners and hold Russia accountable under international law. Dear readers, before this crucial moment before sitting down at the negotiating table, will the Ukrainian military and civilians be able to hold Pokrovsk and retain the territory of Kursk?